This is a Pulp archive recording. All public Pulp archive recordings are licensed under Creative Commons. For more information or to support us, please visit patreon.com/pulparchive. This episode was prepared by Saul and narrated by Tucker, the digital narrator. The Maverick from Circle J by Cleve Endicott. Wild West, Weekly, September, 1929. This episode contains period-typical depictions of crime, violence, and mild profanity. Listener discretion is advised. Chapter 1. Playing with death, I try lying just behind the Montana Bitterroots. It was a tradition that no hombre other than a fugitive from justice could visit Whisky Neck and return to the outside world alive. He usually rode in a coffin if well known enough to be granted that honor in that deeply hidden rendezvous of wrestlers, road agents, tin horns, and professional killers. Mysterious plans were made which the law would have given anything to hear. So its sharp-eyed, suspicious citizenry favored few with the knowledge of the road to its location, and those favored ones usually arrived on exhausted cayuses, looking back over their shoulders and grinning over the fact that they had evaded pursuit. In Whisky Neck they were safe at last, provided they were the type who were known there. One blazing noontide, a lone horseman stopped at the bottom of a steep zigzagging switchback, which ascended a guarded cliff, and he looked up at the heights on which Whisky Neck perched. Never had he been to this dangerous hiding place before, and he could not help but wonder if he would meet a terrible fate there. Yet he was resolved to enter, for he was upon secret business which he had sworn to accomplish. He wanted a man. He was not an officer of the law, nor was he a fugitive from justice, although for the occasion of his trip he had changed many of his features to deceive a not too curious judge. Removing his crease, cracked, bullet-ridden 10-gallon hat to wipe his hot tan brow, he revealed a well-shaped head, which had been shaved as an ex-convict's. His eyebrows appeared to have been burned off by prairie fire, and his clean-featured face was covered with grime. Otherwise a rather good-looking chap, his shaved head gave him a decidedly sinister aspect which he was set upon maintaining. His deep gray eyes seemed cold and heartless, and his mouth tight and cruel, as though he never smiled. And his chin was thrust pugnaciously forward like that of a man who had constantly battled with overwhelming odds in life. His ragged silken shirt, with torn bandana hung around his neck, and his scratched bowhide chaps, were surely the garb of one who had come from afar at a fast gait. The two well-notched 6 guns, which were slung low and forward on either thigh and cut down, quick-draw holsters, might have belonged to a man who lived by them. He had a way of holding himself on the fatigued and lathered bronc with no brand, which indicated that the saddle was his only home. All in all, he looked like a silent hombre, one who spoke only on necessity, and one who had much on his mind that he'd never tell. He did not inspire fear, but rather a feeling that he was not to be taken lightly, nor meddled with. There was but one thing against him in this disguise, and that was his youth. He was not fully of age, yet one would have imagined that he had lived long by experience. His name, for those who knew him but would not have recognized him, was Billy West. Behind him over the Bitterroot Ridge, he owned the Circle J ranch which he had come to Whisky Neck to protect against a bitter enemy. He was not completely sure whether he would find his foe in the forbidden mountain town, although he had a premonition that the man would be there. To the outside world, that enemy was known by the name of Devil Tripp, although he had many aliases. Hunted in every western state for atrocious crimes, this foe could only be sure of refuge in Whisky Neck. And there this famous outlaw could also gather for future raids and crimes new members for a gang which had been destroyed in attempting to ruin the circle. Jay spread and make of it a headquarters for a gigantic Montana rustling ring. Devil Tripp's ambitions knew no limit, and he was as clever and wily as a creeping cougar in carrying them out. This fact the young horseman knew, and he also realized that he took his life in his hands in carrying his war with his treacherous enemy to Whisky Neck. But he was resolved, and there was no turning back. "We've got to go now, Cayuse," he said kindly to the unbranded animal which he had chosen for the trip. "They're watching us from above. I can feel it in my bones. Can you make the grade?" As if in answer to that last question, the sweat-covered bronc started wearily up the switchback without the necessity of a touch of spur. It might have acquired a love for its young master in the short period of acquaintanceship, and learned to obey his voice, or it might have realized that the trip was done, and that above awaited oats, water, and a stall for rest. But Billy West's task had just begun, and as the cayuse bore him up and up over the zigzag trail, his eyes searched crag and niche for those men whose eyes he had felt already watching him. He did not know whether they would spy him out through powerful field glasses and end his life with rifle lead before he reached the summit. He was taking a desperate chance, and he was playing with death. His lips relaxed while he spoke to the wary animal, went tight again, then he waited for the first challenge of his identity and credentials for entering Whisky Neck. It came as he rounded a sharp curve near the very top. On his right was a sheer precipice, with a 200-foot drop. His mount was traveling near the edge in order to avoid stones which might fall from above. If the animal had shied, it would have whirled down to crashing death, carrying Billy West with it. On the young rancher's left suddenly appeared two unshaven men whom he had not seen before. They were sitting on stones as if resting from work, and making the curve wider, and their position had hidden them from visitors from below. Beside them lay shovels and pick, and one was dusting dirt with a greasy rag from a 6 gun which a casual observer might have believed had just been dropped. But Billy West knew otherwise, for his keen eye detected that the weapon already was cocked and waiting for him. It was waiting, even as the two trail guards were waiting, although their attitudes were disarming and full of innocence. A trace of false surprise crossed their features as they looked up and peered at the approaching rider. "Hi, stranger," greeted the one who did not hold the gun, a treacherous smile curving his thick, tobacco-stained lips. "Didn't expect any hombres coming up at this time of day." No expression changed Billy's tense, cold face. Nonchalantly, he removed his battered hat, again revealing his shaved head, and wiped the sweat from off his brow. His attitude, too, was disarming, as if he could never expect his entrance to Whisky Neck to be questioned. He led his first card in his desperate gamble. "Yeah," drawled the second, as the Circle J owner's horse halted before them for a rest. "Hot, ain't it? Terrible hot," he murmured. While he spoke, half shielding his contracted eyes, he noticed gleams of satisfaction leap into those of his neighbors. They had seen his convict head. "Come far?" asked the gun cleaner with more familiarity. "And plumb fast?" suggested the other. "Plumb fast," replied the Circle J owner shortly. The pair laughed together. It was plain they had witnessed the arrival of many fugitives on exhausted cayuses, and they did not disguise the fact that they suspected that a man with a shaved head had a reason for riding fast. "Leave 'em far behind?" asked the gun cleaner, winking meaningfully. "Far enough," replied the Circle J owner, knowing that they were speaking of a sheriff's posse. "Better keep your hat off when you go inter town," instructed the second guard. "Folks will understand, I know," murmured Billy, realizing now that he had passed first inspection. He lightly spurred his horse, which began its tired plodding around the curve. "Adios," called the gun cleaner. "Adios," replied the young rancher. For the remainder of this straight, upslanting distance to the rim of the cliff, he felt the eyes of the two guards boring into his shoulder blades. And he knew they were seriously discussing him. He did not replace his hat, and he chuckled inwardly that such an apparent ruse had fooled them. But would it compel the other citizens of the town to believe that he had broken out of the penitentiary? "I am betting my life on that chance," Billy said to himself as he hove into sight of Whisky Neck. "And it sure is a long shot." Chapter 2. The Second Test. Whisky Neck was not a sizable town, but what little there was of it could have stood off an army in a raid. Each of its 100 buildings scattered about a small square was built of heavy logs drilled with loopholes. On the small tableland, at the edge of which it perched, there were many big cedars, so escape was easy. Passage from cabin to cabin could be accomplished by rear trails, and it was not necessary for a citizen to show himself in the main part of town. Although no one said anything about it, such convenience was for those who expected that private gunmen might enter town to seek them. There were constant shootings in Whisky Neck between jealous rustlers and old outlaw feudists, and the quickest man to draw his revolver was the safest. It was possible for some men to live in this hamlet and never be seen but by a few after having passed the first inspection of entry, but the majority of the citizens hung out in the two main saloons, where a man could drink as much as he pleased of evil-smelling corn liquor. There were faro and roulette tables, and squeaky phonographs to provide music for the more light-hearted who danced together. No woman had ever been known to come to town. There were only two stores, both run by cripples who got their supplies to town by burros. Outside of the bars and the selling of food and ammunition, there was no business. Money was not obtained in Whisky Neck. It was brought in and spent freely, and no one cared from where it came. When citizens ran short, they disappeared again and returned with more. In the daytime, there was not much gaiety, for most citizens either slept or loafed in their cabins. At night, they turned out to gamble and drink. As Billy West entered the main square on his wobbly cayuse, he was surprised at the lack of life. Halting to get his bearings, the puncher noticed the two storekeepers dozing in tilted chairs outside their establishments. Two hounds, which were playing near the water trough outside a livery, stopped to gape at him. One barked savagely, and the second chased it off between a saloon and cabin into the brush. The barking brought a bearded hombre to the door of a deserted pool room. There the fellow remained, watching the Circle J owner, who now spurred his bronc toward the water trough. That pool room owner, Stowe, was in his doorway when Billy's horse ceased drinking, during which time the young waddy spied two more men in cabin doorways watching him. He could not prevent a slight smile from crossing his lips. "I reckon they're wondering who I am," he said to himself, "and wondering what I am going to do." He realized that he would have to go somewhere quickly to offset suspicion, yet he didn't like to accost a stranger for information. It would be better to appear as if he knew something of Whisky Neck. Those three watching citizens might take a notion to challenge him, and if he did not satisfy their curiosity, they might sound a general alarm. "We'd better amble up to the saloon, cayuse," the Circle J owner told his mount. "There's something that's sure to happen quickly, but it's got to happen sooner or later." It was in his mind to find some way of making these outlaws believe that he belonged here, although how he could do it would be largely a matter of luck. If once they accepted him, Billy was sure that he would be safe. If they didn't, he would die. There would be no chance to fight them. So he would have to do his best to fool them from the start. One thing he knew was absolutely necessary, and that was always to keep his head, and never to let them think that he feared them. In the short distance from the water trough to the log building, which seemed to be the largest barroom, the puncher steeled himself for the ordeal. And as he swung down from his cayuse, he again surveyed the town to see if he still was watched. He was. Boldly, he stood and relaced the strings which tied his holsters to his thighs in true gunman style. The move seemed to indicate that if gunplay were a necessity, he would have his holsters firm so they would not jerk up as they were quickly emptied. Then, with a swinging stride, he jumped to the plank sidewalk, went across, shoved open the double-hinged doors of the saloon, and stepped within the dimly lighted barroom. For a moment, Billy West saw nothing, for his sun-blinded eyes were not accustomed to the darkness. There was absolutely no sound, and he at first suspected that the saloon was empty. But a moment later, when he began to make out objects, he realized his mistake. There were several men peering at him. 3 of these sat at a poker table on the left of the long room, cards in hand, gaping up. They most likely had waited to see who was coming in, expecting to greet the visitor, and finding him to be a stranger, they were surprised. Or they might have been waiting for some leader to discuss a wicked project at the bar. On the right of the room stood a great lumpy, shouldered, bearded roughneck with his muscular arms hooked by elbows on the bar. His ugly face had every feature of a bully, and already a half-sneering smile was crossing his lips as he spied Billy. That big fellow in flannel shirt and khaki trousers tucked into lace boots might have been waiting for someone too, or he might merely have been watching the poker game. By this fellow's side rested a much slighter man with hollow, pale cheeks, burning green eyes, and narrow shoulders. He was so nervous that he might have been a drug addict. His body was as taut as a steel spring. 2 light, short-barreled, .45 caliber revolvers slung down on his hips immediately branded him for what he was: a desperate gunman who killed because he couldn't help himself. Of all the men within the saloon, Billy West regarded him as the only one who would be truly dangerous in a quarrel. The others were cowards or bluffs, but this gunslinger was a man to be reckoned with. The slight, snake-like man stood at the bar, also taking the measure of Billy, who was halted within the doorway. The Circle J owner knew he must not pause too long. Quite casually, Billy started toward the bar, eyes avoiding the men within the room and taking in the empty gambling tables. The old phonograph sat on a homemade cabinet in the big mirror behind the counter, before which he halted and lifted his foot to the brass rail. There was still no change in sound, and with the cessation of the jingle of Billy's spurs, silence again fell. Although the Circle J owner did not turn, he felt the eyes of all upon him. Even the sawed-off, putty-faced, white-aproned waiter down the bar was gaping at him. This sullen tenseness began to grate on Billy's nerves. Setting his battered hat upon the counter, he motioned for the bartender. The fellow came toward him awkwardly without speaking, and when he halted, he waited for the puncher to say something. "Water," Billy said gruffly. The waiter was taken back. "Water?" he questioned, as if not sure that the puncher had ordered a drink of whiskey. "Water," the Circle J owner replied, frowning deeply. "I don't drink hard stuff." There was a gasp from behind him at the poker table. There was a chuckle from the gunman down the bar. There was a snort of intense disgust from the big bully beside the slight killer. The waiter was simply flabbergasted, and he leaned across the counter to stare right into Billy's face. "Ya is a stranger," the sawed-off muttered. "I'll be consarned," he exclaimed. "You don't drink, you want water? Is you gone loco? Does you know what town you is in?" Billy took a deep breath, stepping back slightly. His face was cold and his eyes contracted. "I said water," he snapped. "I ain't no tin horn water." His savage tone made the bartender jump with fear. And immediately the waiter was afraid that he had said too much himself. There was no telling who the stranger was that came stalking boldly into a Whisky Neck saloon and had the gall to tell the world that he didn't drink hard liquor. "I'm sorry," muttered the waiter, turning to clutch a glass. "I thought you didn't say water." If Billy's tone frightened the waiter and made others in the room uneasy, it had absolutely no effect upon the big, lumpy-shouldered, bearded bully. Perhaps that hombre didn't have sense enough to be impressed. He saw in the Circle J owner a young fellow half his size, a stranger whom he was curious to find out about, and a man whom he might tantalize and make fun of. So the lummox came stalking up the counter like a grizzly bear on parade. He halted and spat upon the floor at Billy's feet. "Say," the bully sang out, "if I heard you say you wanted water, we don't sell it here. Do you get the point? I means we don't sell. The only thing you guzzles, so you is out of luck. You better buy a man's drink if you ain't no tin horn." Hearing those words, the Circle J owner knew the test had come. He could not back out. Every other man in the saloon waited to see what he would do. Something would have to be done. He could leave no doubt of his fitness for membership in this criminal colony. He must act as viciously as the big bully and bluff this man just as hard. The Circle J owner turned calmly, eyeing the last speaker from head to toe. At the same time, he anchored his own feet noiselessly to the floor. When he spoke, his voice was low and as cold as ice. "I don't recall speaking to you, hombre," he said, and turned away to look at the bartender. "I said water," he rang out. "Hi-yar!" burst the big bully at his side, reaching out a paw to clutch at his shoulder. "You don't insult bear, Jebbers, you don't." He yanked the puncher around to face him. "I said you don't get no water, and I is hankering to know your funny moniker, and on what calaboose you just busted loose from with that shaved head, and what you's doing in Whisky Neck, and you better spit it right out afore I—" "Before you what?" Billy interrupted, face flushing, shoulders hunching. The bully had been waiting for just that posture, the hunching of a gunman about to go for his weapon. With a yell of triumph, the big fellow called, "Bear Jebbers, lunge forward afore I knock your block off," he shouted as he swung a mighty fist to crash into Billy's face. The bully was fast, for he had planned the move from the beginning, but he was not fast enough. Billy, too, was ready, knowing this fellow would never draw, but would fight with his fist because he was the bigger man. As quick as a flash, the Circle J owner sidestepped. Not a second too soon did he swerve out of the way. A rush of wind fanned him as Bear Jebber's hairy jaw missed him as quickly as Billy dodged back. He jumped forward again while the bully was off balance. The Circle J owner's arms were lowered and ready as he came in. He delivered an uppercut with terrific force. It landed flush on the point of the bully's jaw, lifting Bear Jebber's clean off his feet. "You," grunted the hulking fellow. That was all. Just one grunt, his head snapped back on his shoulders and his huge frame collapsed full length upon the planks with a crash which shook the entire saloon. On the floor, Bear rolled over, shuddered, and lay as still as death. Chapter 3: Gunplay. Again there was silence in the saloon, but this time it was that of astonishment. At once Billy realized his opportunity and he turned to the flabbergasted waiter. "I still want that water," he drawled. He didn't get it. The bartender was too overwhelmed to hear. The sawed-off Popeye little man scrambled forward and glanced over the counter to see if the bully really was done for. "Great leapin' lizards," the waiter exclaimed. "You killed Bear Jevers with one swipe." "Killed him," echoed 3 men from the poker table, rising to their feet as one man. "You don't say, he ain't dead," snapped another voice. And Billy turned to see who it was. He spied the nervous, hollow-cheeked gunman now on his knees on the floor beside Bear Jevers. It seemed that this killer was the only one not too odd to act. His head was at the bully's heart with listening ear. And soon he looked with deadly green eyes at Billy. "You sneak!" Suddenly the little gunman shouted, rising to his feet. "You socked me pard with a gun butt. I seen it." "He didn't sock him with no gun," called someone from across the room. He didn't have no time. Billy knew that some outlaw was sticking up for him, but the fair play did no good. The gunman, who now appeared to be Bear's friend, was bent on revenge. "He did," shrieked the killer, "crazy to burn powder smoke. Go for your gun, you tin horn, afore I burn you down." Again there was no time to wait, nor was there any privilege to first draw. To pause a split second meant that the killer would have his guns out. The little fellow known as Dopey jerked violently and his hand shot down for the 2 short-barreled weapons. But as he started, Billy went into action. At the same time, his body contortion was but a blur in the eyes of the spectators. He might have bent double, no one could say. His hands flashed by his thighs, and the next thing anyone knew, they were filled with the black butts of 2.6 guns which spewed flame a yard long. In the thunder of the terrific explosions, there sounded a scream which was not the puncher's. Smoke clouded the room, blinding out what happened to Dopey. And when it drifted away with a puff of wind which came through the swinging doors across the room, they revealed the Circle J owner on his knees on the floor. Not far in front of him was Dopey, writhing about on the planks, whimpering like a sick puppy, clutching first one wrist and then the other. One gun was still jammed in his holster. The other weapon had been shot completely away by Billy's bullets, which also ripped the skin from the little killer's knuckles. "Great leapin' lizards," was the first exclamation coming from the bartender. "You beat Dopey to the draw? It ain't ever been done afore." Still, with his smoking guns in hand, the Circle J owner began to rise to his feet. All the while, he kept his eyes on the writhing gunman, who might at any moment attempt to pull the holstered gun. As he rose, Billy could hear the clattering of the chairs at the poker table on the other side of the room, where the former players were getting over their fear and astonishment. "He beat Dopey," one voice cried. "It was fair and square." "He licked Bear Jevers," another yelled. Suddenly, Billy became aware that these poker players, whom he was not watching, were speaking to someone else. He remembered the puff of wind which cleared the powder fog and realized that a newcomer had entered the room. It might have been the fellow for whom the barroom was waiting. The puncher began to turn slowly to see who it was. But he didn't get completely around before a sharp, gruff voice made him freeze to a standstill. "Drop them guns," was the order of this new voice. "I got you covered from behind, stranger, and I'll blow you clean to kingdom come." Drop them guns. For a moment, Billy West didn't know what to do. There was no denying that he was caught like a rat in a trap. If the newcomer at the door behind him were any kind of a marksman, the fellow would kill him on the first move. Billy might dodge, whirl, and shoot, but what would be the sense in it? He felt that already he had proved himself to these outlaws, two of whom appeared to be sticking up for him by the tone of their voice. Surrender was the most sensible thing for the present. "You've got me, hombre," he merely said, slipping his guns into his holsters. "You've got me in the back, hombre, if that's the way you fight." "I says to drop them guns, you killer," Billy heard the gruff foe say. "I am aiming ter have peace, yer." "Give 'em ter the barkeep, or you'll have everlasting peace. I fights me own way with killers." A protest came from the poker table. "Give the kid a chance. He licked him fair and square." "I'm for the kid. Bear and Dopey ain't dead," sounded another voice. "So am I," sounded another at the poker table. "Bear got fresh with him, and Dopey got sore when he lambasted Bear," said another. There was a short pause during which it seemed that the newcomer at the door was relenting. Finally, that man's voice said, "Who is the kid?" "We don't know," answered someone at the poker table. "Turn round," ordered the newcomer, "and keep your hands away from your gun butts." Billy turned slowly, obeying the last instruction to keep his fingers away from his thighs. He was almost too anxious to see this newcomer, but he allowed no expression of curiosity to enter his face. What he showed to his captor was the cold, unemotional face which the other hangers-on had seen in the saloon. The moment the Circle J owner saw the fellow, he recognized him with an inward start, which it was well that he was steeled to control. His captor was none other than the man whom he had come to Whisky Neck to seek. It was Devil Tripp, the notorious rustler. There Devil stood as tall as bear jabbers, but not nearly as broad. Burning green eyes, set deeply in his long, hawk-like face, were peering intently at the young puncher. He looked in the dim light like the very demon whom he so much resembled that he had been nicknamed for. Hair far back on his long forehead, nose beaked, chin adorned with a pointed goatee, he stood menacingly, with 2 6 guns in his outstretched hands covering the Circle J owner. No expression of recognition crossed his face, but a slight cold grin played at the corners of his thin lips, as if he were amused that he had caught something in his trap. He appeared for a moment as if he were going to play with his prisoner like a cat does with a mouse. "So you licked Bear and shot up Dopey," he sneered. "What name is you calling yourself by? Stranger, we just want to know for your coffin plate." Chapter 4. Devil's dictum Billy West had seldom seen the real Devil Tripp face to face, for the notorious rustler was a master of disguise himself. In several attempts to ruin the puncher's spread, Devil had entered the Circle J ranch house behind clever makeups, and he had fooled everybody for a time. Twice in hand-to-hand combats, Billy had defeated him, but the young rancher wondered whether the outlaw really did recognize him. There was a faint chance that he didn't, for sometimes men are most easily fooled by their own tricks. A bunco sharp often falls for the very scheme he plays upon others, because he doesn't suspect that it is a trick. Deliberate falsehood was not in the Circle J owner's character, and he had no intention of telling this rustler that he was someone whom he was not. But he had to give some impression which his shaved head thus far had done in Whisky Neck. So again, Billy was compelled to fence with a foe. The Circle J owner fell back against the bar. He was careful that the light from the doorway was not full upon his face, and he hooked his elbows behind him on the counter in a gesture of bravado which he knew never failed to bluff these outlaws. "I might ask the same of you, homebreed," he said calmly. "My name is my own business." "Wall, I'll be consarned," exclaimed Devil Tripp, "if ye ain't got more nerve than I ever heerd tell of afore." He paused and looked sharply. "Mebbe your name." "Don't matter, kid," he sneered, "'cause dead men ain't got no use for one. I thinks I'll drill you right now." Devil's hammers clicked in the silent room as he cocked his weapons, but somehow Billy had a premonition right then that the outlaw had no intention of shooting him down. It was a mere bluff to frighten him. Did Devil want to see how much he could stand? "That's a plumb yellow way to shoot a man, hombre," Billy replied coldly. "That rat, Dopey," He gestured with his thumb at the unconscious gunman on the floor. Gave me a better break. Devil's face beamed with delight. He laughed loudly. Ho, 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 he roared. So you think I'd take a chance at with a killer, like you? Is you crazy? I ain't no low-down gunslinker like you, he mocked. You ain't safe to live, kid. I uses me head with your kind when I can't beat a hombre to the draw. I beats him by me brains. That's how I aims to beat you, savvy? He asked. Mucho, ironically replied the Circle J owner. So, ejaculated Devil. You comes from the Rio Grande country. I thunk so. That's where they breed slick killers like ya. He paused to peer intently at the puncher. Say, he exclaimed, I ha' seen you somewhere afore. I kinda recognize your mug. What's your name? Here was the greatest test of all. Billy's face froze with apparent distrust. That's my business, hombre, he snapped. You nor none o' your kind who run in packs like wolves will ever know. Where I come from, where I am going and what I intend to do, is my business, and it ain't yours even with 2 guns in your hands asking. He's a lone wolf, Devil, called an excited outlaw from near the poker table. You should have seen him draw on Dopey. Look out for him. He's fast as chain lightning. I heard tell of a hombre like him down in the prickly pear country, Devil, called another poker player. No one ever knowed his name. He's got more notches on his guns than scratches on his chaps. Look out, Devil. He ain't dangerous, protested a third. The kid ain't harming nobody what don't harm him. He just wanted a drink of water. Yeah, put in the second poker player. They say that Lone Wolf in the prickly pear country don't never swill whiskey 'cause it makes him go gunning, just for the fun of killing. A sly expression came into Devil's eyes, and he seemed to be thinking about what those men had said. He was the kind of man who bent everyone to his will, who used fearless men. He needed them in his gang. He might have seen a stanch ally in the puncher, for suddenly he became affable. Billy understood that the third test had been passed. Devil was going to bide his time to find out who the puncher was. You got nerve, kid, the outlaw said, grinning. I was bluffing ya, and to show ye that I am not scared o' ya. Watch me. He dropped the muzzles of his weapons, which he thrust into the 2 holsters on his side. Stepping forward, he held out his hand to shake. Welcome to Whisky Neck, hombre, he said. Have a drink on me, 'cause we got business to attend to. There ain't many strangers what we welcome here. Billy took the palm in a grip of steel which rivaled Devil's, and they shook. I know, the puncher replied, and he turned to the bar as if Devil's greeting meant little to him. I'll take that water now, he said to the waiter. Great leapin' lizards, exclaimed the sawed-off bartender. This time the waiter turned to get the drink, and no one questioned its availability. After Devil Tripp had given instructions to carry Bear Jebbers into a back room of the saloon, and for the poker players to give Dopey first aid at the hardware across the street, he turned to the bar and ordered moonshine. He drank it at Billy's side, neither of them speaking for some time. The Circle J owner was aloof, and the notorious rustler didn't want to make an advance. Usually, men came to him asking membership in his gang, and now he was provoked that this young waddy, whom he thought he knew and couldn't play, said nothing. Going or stay long? Devil asked, hoping to start a conversation. Until it's time to go back, Billy replied abruptly. Ha! Devil ejaculated. We all stay here just that long. I plan to go out soon for a big lot of business which has been hanging fire for some time, lots of mazuma in it. The Circle J owner said nothing. He was thinking hard. Things had happened so swiftly in Whisky Neck that he had not had time to gather his thoughts and make plans. He had not hoped to run up against his enemy at once, and it baffled him. Before gaining entrance to the mountain town, he had not known just how he would handle this present situation. He was above provoking a deliberate gunfight with Devil Tripp and shooting the outlaw down, which he easily could have done right now. That would have been cowardice. He knew that he could beat this man to the draw. He felt certain of it. There was another aspect to the situation. Devil had many friends in Whisky Neck who would seek revenge if Billy killed him outright. The Circle J owner was not foolish enough to throw his own life away in order to end his enemies. He wanted to leave Whisky Neck and take Devil Tripp with him if possible. But going down the one and only trail from town was filled with great danger. All the time he was in Whisky Neck, he knew that he would be spied upon. To make a break would be very difficult. The entire town might be alarmed against him. There was no escape over the huge cliffs of the tableland, for no rope was long enough to reach from the rim to the bottom. Even if he could find one, he would be forced to leave his horse, and then wander for days through the mountains beyond the town. To dash down the switchback was sure death. Huge stones could be hurled from above as he went zigzagging down the trail. The rifle lead would pursue him. He simply had to leave Whisky Neck in the same manner in which he had come, as an outlaw privileged to go of his own free will. "Say, young feller," spoke up Devil Tripp, "you ain't very sociable. Maybe that's why Bear took a swing at you and Dopey went for his smoke poles. If you is allowed to stay in this town much longer, you will learn that I am the big boss here. Maybe you never heard of me." Billy picked his hat from the bar and set it upon his head so that the rim was over, his eyes shielding his face. Then he turned to the outlaw and looked him over calmly. "What's your name?" he asked briefly, as if it really didn't matter. "Didn't you hear them jaspers calling me Devil Tripp?" demanded the outlaw angrily. "Don't that mean nothing to ya?" The Circle J owner shrugged his shoulders. "Wall, I'll be concerned," exploded Devil. His vanity was hurt, for he thought he was known all over. He whammed the bar with his fist and ordered another drink, which he gulped in one swallow. "Huh?" he grunted, wiping his lips with the back of his long, talon-like hands. "Kid, you ain't got hoss sense. If I didn't like the way you did that shooting, I'd never stand here and talk with you." "That's a privilege. Few hombres. Enjoy. I got a reputation. What means something?" "What does it mean?" Billy inquired, as if disinterested, really egging the rustler on. Devil was just angry enough to want to boast. "Listen," he said, "you must have come from far, never to have heard o' me. Right this very minute I got plans afoot for one of the biggest rustling rings in Montana. I was coming in this saloon just a second ago to talk it over with Bear and Dopey. They're my chief aides, 'cause no one ever licked 'em before you did. I got a dozen more tough new hanging about town waiting for me to say the word to go." Devil took a drink and waved away the bartender's invitation for another. "I know when I've had enough," he grunted, and turned to Billy again. He was slightly drunk already, or he never would have spoken as he did to a stranger. "Listen," he continued, "I'm going to wipe out a gang of Malika Dells what runs a ranch just over the Bitterroot Ridge, which ain't far from here. That ranch is just on the Montana side o' the Idaho border. There's only one pass across the ridge from Idaho to Montana, which goes down through a canyon to the Circle J spread." Billy's face muscles tightened as he heard this outlaw speak of his own outfit, and he listened keenly to what followed. Devil told him that by raiding the Circle J ranch at night and burning down all the buildings, he would destroy the value of the spread. If the punchers fought him, he picked them off with his gang with rifle bullets. It was his hope to trap the entire Circle J outfit while it slept. Then he would run all the cattle up to Mustang Pass and over the state line before the officers of the law could get on his trail. This pass, he said, could be fortified to hold off pursuit for a week, and by that time the cattle would be sold. With the ranch ruined, Devil planned to buy it for a song from any remaining relative of the present owner. Then he donned a disguise and set himself up as the rancher. "You can leave it to me to make everybody in that section like me," he said. "I'll pretend I am a dude rancher or something. Then I'll just keep whipping all the cattle on the plains and run that stock to the Circle J ranch. Then it'll be taken up to Mustang Pass and brought to Idaho." He paused to chuckle over his plans. "What do you think of that?" he asked. "Ain't that a man-sized job? I ain't no faker. I goes in for things in a big way. I plan to do that very thing for more'n a year." "What's stopping you?" Billy asked cynically, knowing full well the reason. Devil grunted with disgust and hoisted his gun belts. For a moment, he didn't want to say what had prevented him from accomplishing this mission before, but he finally felt inclined to do so. He became deadly earnest. "Wall, you see," he began, "the hombre what owns that ranch is 1-0, the plumb luckiest gents what ever lived. He can shoot like." Devil glanced at Billy. "Why, he's quicker on the draw than you are. He's a regular streak of lightning. If it weren't for him, I'd owned that outfit long ago. I got hold o' Dopey to kill that Circle J skunk, but now you put Dopey out of whack for a good 2 months. I got to get someone else. I got to get hold of some hombre with nerve. What will go right? Enter Circle J and shoot that young skunk owner down to the ground." Devil placed his hand on Billy's shoulder. "How would you like to be that hombre?" he asked. "I'd pay you enough brass so you never would have to kill agin you could quit working. I might even make you a partner in my wrestling ring. You couldn't go wrong. Sign up with me. What do you say, kid?" A moment he marveled that he had such a streak of luck. And then his emotion quickly changed to one of hatred for the wicked cowardice of Devil, who wanted him to do murder, to act as a paid assassin. It was not until then that Billy West was positive that he had completely fooled this notorious outlaw. For the rustler was capable of any treachery to accomplish his end, perhaps. If he had not been so anxious to secure a killer to meet Billy West, he would have looked closer at the young puncher. It was Devil's jealousy of the Circle J owner, and his ambition to possess the Circle J spread, which made him blind to the fact that his very foe stood before him. Devil saw the youth only as a gun wizard, and he was ready to excuse the shooting of Dopey and the thrashing of Bear in order to gain Billy to carry out his desires. Devil even had put his pride in his pocket and had spoken first to the puncher, who stood aloof. He made the fatal mistake of telling his plans, while before he usually kept everything to himself. And if Devil had made such a fool of himself, Billy quickly grasped the infinite possibilities in knowing the outlaw's plans. True, he had to fight to keep from crashing his fist into his foe's satanic countenance, but he had resolved to control his feelings. He yet had made no promise to the notorious rustler in joining Devil's gang. There was a chance of getting the outlaw away from Whisky Neck. Once in the open, he could fight it out with him. He would be able to tell Devil his real name and make the man pay for his treachery and his insults. Again, Billy fenced with his opponent. "But you say, hombre," he said coolly, "that this Billy West is faster on the trigger than I am." "Wow," Devil replied with a grin. "Ain't you jealous o' him? Does you think there is any hombre faster than you? I leave it up to you." Devil understood gunmen, knowing how jealous they were of their reputations and how they hated to think the Maverick from Circle J was a man living who could beat them to the draw. Now he was taunting Billy, and the Circle J owner pretended to take the bait. "I'd like to see if Billy West is faster," the Circle J owner murmured as if to himself. "Sure," ejaculated the outlaw. "Why don't you? Will you join me, gang? That's the way to talk. I wouldn't let no cow chaser get a reputation to beat yours. Why, look at who you is." "Who?" Billy snapped, and Devil stepped back to scratch his head. "I'll be concerned if I know who ye is," he said, "but I sure has seen ye somewhere afore. But I can't remember. Maybe I will after a while. But it don't make no difference with me who yer is. I'll set things right. Will you join the gang? You want me to go to Circle J and see if I am faster than Billy West on the draw?" The puncher asked. "Sure," said Devil. "I'll go." Billy replied. "Fine," cried the outlaw, rubbing his hands. "It's just what I wanted. Now everything is set for that Montana wrestling ring. We'll move out of here when I give the word. I can't tell you when, 'cause it's secret. You just hang around town and get acquainted with the boys. Stay away from Bear and Dopey, 'cause they has got a grudge agin you. Don't get in no fights, 'cause I don't want you getting killed. You can't have any deserted cabin around here to live in. No one owns 'em. They is free for your kind hombre. Now, let's have a drink terhind the bargain. 2 shots of lightning," Devil called out to the waiter. "Make 'em big." "No," Billy instructed. I'll take water." And he looked the outlaw leader squarely in the eye. "Wall, I'll be consarned," Devil exclaimed. "Yez the first hombre would ever refuse to drink with me, and I let get away with it." Chapter 5. The word to move 2 days of waiting in Whisky Neck for Billy West proved a trial as dangerous as any which he had gone through before. He saw little of Devil, for the latter was busy bargaining with others to make up his gang. It took a great deal of talking and choosing. He was constantly making plans with Bear and Dopey in secret. The Circle J owner saw them but once. The gunman had his wrists bound up as he passed Billy sullenly on the sidewalk. He ran across Bear Jebbers in the supply store, and the latter merely nodded and went out. It was plain that the pair did not bear the same trust for him that Devil did. And Billy knew that he would have to watch them. Perhaps Devil had promised to allow them to kill him after his task of murdering Billy West was over. That was the way with crooks. Devil's fear of this stranger might lead to treachery. There were others in town who feared him and left him alone. Word of his gunfighting prowess had gone before him. Wherever he went, he saw men watching him. They didn't speak, thinking that they might anger him. Billy's reputation as a lone wolf saved him from any fraternizing. He lived in a small one-room cabin at the end of town with his horse occupying a lean-to at the rear. At the supply stores, he had little to say to the two cripples when he went to the barroom so as not to appear afraid to enter them. He sat by himself in a corner playing solitaire and drinking water. He drank gallons of it, and the others in the saloon watched him in awe. If he had taken a drink of whiskey, which he never had done in his life, most likely all would have left the building. It was rumored that when he did drink hard liquor, he went on a killing rampage. Whisky Neck was relieved that he did not change his liquid. It was an amusing situation for Billy alone in his cabin. He laughed freely, wondering that these outlaws could all be so stupid. But they lived on the strength of reputations, which each of them had in his own way. Some were famous hold-up artists and others brand blotters. There were out-and-out murderers among them, and gamblers with worse reputations. Billy grew to be able to spot each man's calling. He thought he recognized faces from the wanted posters which he had seen tacked to the walls of Cowtown post offices. The waiting was long, and he grew tired. There was no amusement for him in town, and he longed to be back at his ranch again, tending to business. He thought of his pards there, who were anxiously awaiting his return. Among them were the gangly veteran Buck Foster with a long, drooping, grizzled mustache, who usually accompanied him wherever he went. There was the red-headed, beak-nosed Joe Scott, of his own age, a true friend, if there ever was one. Yes, Joe was one fine, loyal pard. There was even the slant-eyed, yellow-faced Chinese cook, Sing Lo, who was constantly up to some devilment. Lastly, there was Ruth Daw, his pretty cowgirl foster sister, and Jim Benson, the slow-going foreman, and his motherly wife, Anna. It was these people whom Devil Tripp wanted to have shot down like escaping convicts as they fled from burning buildings. It was they who had helped foil his plans before, and he hated them for it. Sometimes Billy's anger became so great that he could hardly keep from seeking the vicious fiend out and telling him right there and then that he was Billy West. But he kept control himself. He walked off into the brush to cool, and for something to do he set a target upon a tree and practiced shooting. The revolver explosions echoed over Whisky Neck twice a day. The citizens listened and grinned to themselves. "That lone wolf always keeps in training," they said. "He's a bad hombre, I'll bet. He shot up a whole army, and that's why he's hiding in town." Devil Tripp heard of the practice, and he winked at his gathering gangsters. "That kid is putting the finishing touches on his gunslinging style so that he can put the finishing touch on that there Billy West skunk," the outlaw said. "I reckon I got the right hombre this time to do it. I'd give $1,000 to see the draw match." Dopey said nothing. There was a fierce light in his eyes which told of a gathering storm within him. Bear Jebbers said nothing, but he looked meaningfully at the gunman. That glance said lots. Devil saw it and became silent, but his eyes seemed to tell them to wait until Billy's task had been accomplished. The call to move came when the Circle J owner least expected it. Billy was sleeping just at daybreak when a pounding sounded on his cabin door. Startled, he was out of bed and on his feet. Instantly, with the gun ready, which had been under his pillow, he opened the door stealthily and was surprised to find Devil and 3 ugly, unshaven fellows whom he had seen about town. "Howdy, kid," Devil greeted him, holding out his hand. "Everything is set and you move right pronto." They all filed into the cabin and took boxes. Devil extracted a map from his pocket and laid it on a rough table. He was all smiles and constantly chuckled. "Here is a map o' the Circle J layout," he said, pointing to the paper. "Sit down, I wants you to see it." Billy rubbed the sleep from his eyes. He was surprised to see how well the map had been drawn. Nothing was left out. Everything was labeled: barn, corral, house, and bunk shack, all centered about the ranch yard. There was even the pump and a clump of pines which stood behind the mesh shack. There was an arroyo which ran from the trees off to a draw in the plains. He wondered how Devil had procured such an exact drawing. "Now listen," the outlaw said. "You and these gents is going to meet up with some o' the other boys in a canyon on the other side of the Bitterroot Ridge. It'll take you a day's travel, and you'll get there at dark. There is some stuff to be lugged up to here," he pointed at the pines behind the ranch house on the map, "which will take you all night." "Yeah," spoke up one of the other outlaws. "Some kerosene, and we can't be too dang careful that it don't spill and smell ter high heaven." "Kerosene?" Billy questioned. Devil scowled at his gangster who had spoken. "That's ter be put on them buildings when we make the raid," he said. "We wants ter be sure they burn. We got ter have light to shoot the skunks down with." Billy said nothing. "Now, if you helps put the kerosene up in the trees," Devil continued, "you'll get a good idea how everything is fixed. The boys what helps you will lay low and let you take a little scout around in the dark. You can pick out the ranch house and figure how to get inter it. Just an hour afore dawn, we makes the raid. Just when it's still dark." Hope leaped within Billy's breast at this information. To be left to his own resources at his own ranch meant that he'd be able to speak with his friends there and warn them. But suddenly he wondered if he would not be spied upon. Was Devil so foolish that he'd let a stranger out of his sight a few hours before the big raid? Was this a trap just afore he makes the raid? Devil continued, rolling a cigarette. "You go up to the ranch house and pound on the door. Billy West will come down to let you in. You can act like you must see him on important business, then go inside the ranch house to talk with him. If the shutters ain't drawn over the windows, we might see what happens." "And what is to happen?" The Circle J owner asked calmly. "You can say ter that Billy West skunk that you is in my gang, and I sent you ter burn him down with lead and powder," replied the notorious outlaw. "Make him go for his guns and wing him just like you did Dopey. Then you can go right through the ranch house and out the back door. When we hears the gunfight, we will touch off the kerosene and make a roaring furnace o', the whole layout. That'll be the end." Devil and his 3 gangsters guffawed, but the Circle J owner was silent. A question occurred to him which had long been in his mind, and he wanted to know its answer. "If you just want Billy West murdered," he said, "why don't you have him dry gulched on his spread? That would end him for you." Devil's face turned from pleasure to anger. He chewed at his lips and twisted the ends of his satanic goatee. "You see, it's this way," he growled, seething with emotion. "I has sworn to that Bill West skunk that I'd get my revenge on him. I means ter do it. If he was just murdered on his range, he wouldn't know who done it. He's got to die in plumb disgracin' when he knows I brings about his killin'. If you beat him ter the draw after, you tell him that I sent you ter do it. That's fine revenge for me when you leave his carcass for the fire. He'll have plenty of time ter be sorry that he ever tried ter fight me. He'll die the kind of death I wants him to die, does you see?" Devil demanded. "I am going to get my revenge." "I see," Billy replied. Behind his back, he clenched his fists and he held on to his feelings as he never had done before. The rank cowardice of this fiend was almost unbelievable. Too afraid to meet the Circle J owner himself, Devil was delegating someone who he hoped would do what he wanted to do himself. Chapter 6. The Trail of Death half an hour later. Billy West and the three ugly, unshaven gangsters moved out of Whisky Neck on their own mounts. Devil was left behind to meet them. That night, the four horsemen went down the switchback which Billy had come up. Outside of two new guards, no one in town saw them go, but the guards seemed to have been informed of the departure. "So long, boys," one called out. "Bring back the bacon." He meant stolen money. "Goodbye, kid," called the other guard to Billy West. "Bring me back a couple of bullet-scarred scalps." The Circle J owner said nothing, but his traveling companions made jokes. Down the zigzagging trail and for a few miles over a narrow trail through densely covered hills, they were jovial. They attempted to talk with Billy. When he didn't reply, they left him alone. He was a strange, silent man. The gangsters thought he might become friendly for the trip, but they were too afraid of him to try to make him talk. So through the hills and through an Idaho mountain range, the four jogged silently. Billy had lots of time to think. Devil Tripp occupied his mind a long while. Sometimes in the saddle he went hot with anger, and then he would turn cold with horror at that outlaw's brutality. He thanked his lucky stars that he had come to Whisky Neck to seek the man out, for he was just in time to nip in the bud another of Devil's treacherous schemes to destroy Circle J. Now that Billy knew of it, he was sure that he would be able to foil the outlaw. But just saving the ranch from burning and the lives of his pards at home was not enough. Devil must be caught himself and hanged by the law. There were already murder charges standing out against him. To trap Devil meant quick thinking, the young puncher realized. For the time, Billy decided to keep playing into the hands of the outlaws. He did not think that he was being treacherous himself. He had made no direct promises to Devil the latter's wicked cowardice, threw out all moral questions of how Billy should act against him. The old saying that it takes a crook to catch a crook came to mind, and the Circle J owner could not withhold a faint grin. His part now was that of a crook in the eyes of his traveling companions of Devil, Dopey, and Bear. He was no better than they. What had happened to Dopey and Bear during a silent lunch beside a cold stream, Billy wondered why they had not turned up. Were they coming with Devil? Had the wrestler chief been afraid to send them along with Billy's caravan, thinking that those two thugs might try to take Billy's life on the trail? Had Devil promised to allow them to kill him after he had shot down the Circle J owner in the ranch house? There would then be an excellent opportunity for them to do it. Billy was still ruminating upon this when the horses took the trail again toward the high Bitterroot Ridge, beyond which was Montana. He thought of Devil's instructions for the raid. It was planned for the young puncher to outdraw Billy West in the ranch house. Then he was to run through the structure as it caught fire from kerosene and go out by the back door. What if Dopey and Bear were hiding outside the rear door of the ranch house with rifles? There they would be able to shoot him down. And later they could say that they took him for the real Billy West, seeking escape. Was that it? "The dirty sneaks," the Circle J owner exclaimed. "What's that?" asked one of the gangsters beside him on horseback. "Nothing," Billy snapped, eyeing the man coldly. "Was you thinking about some homebreast what double-crossed you one time in your life?" asked the outlaw. "What happened to Dopey and Bear?" the young puncher inquired. The outlaw turned away and shrugged his shoulders. "Maybe they is coming with Devil later today," was the answer. "We never knows about Devil's plans. He just gives each of us one thing to do. And we does it. He knows the rest." That was the last thing said for a long while. The horses began climbing through the foothills on the Idaho side of the Bitterroots. Up and up they went, plodding wearily, through short canyons into deep gulches, across valleys, and over steep hills. The four riders were carried. They began to reach a part of the country now which the Circle J owner knew as he did his first spelling book in school. At this particular point, the Bitterroot Ridge rose as a solid gleaming wall of granite into the blue sky. It appeared impassable, for there were no ledges leading to its top, and man could not scale its flat walls. It was impassable for 50 miles north and south except for a small hidden pass. This was Mustang Pass, not many feet wide, hard to find, and the only means of going from Idaho to Montana at this point. It was this pass which could be fortified to hold off pursuit when Devil planned to sneak his herds from one state to another. It was the reason why he wanted to own the Circle J spread, for all the land on the Montana side either belonged to Billy West or was leased by him from the government. Devil had attempted before to use this pass for his rustling schemes, and he had been defeated by the Circle J outfit. The outlaw had constructed a log fort in the very center of the narrow defile, where it widened out into a small bowl. From this cabin with loopholes, his men could shoot down invaders. It was but a few minutes after Billy and the three gangsters trailed into the pass that they passed this cabin. The Circle J owner noticed that it appeared deserted, but the door was closed. And he had a feeling that again the notorious rustler had planted some of his men inside. The riders did not stop, for the sun was setting behind them and purple shadows were filling the defile. Without a word, they went through their mounts, clattering over the rocky floor. Then they issued on the Montana side of the Bitterroots, upon a half-mile-wide plateau which was knee-deep with luxurious grass and carpeted with 100-colored mountain flowers. The breeze was from the east, bringing to them again the strong scent of pines. "Good wind on this side," remarked one of the outlaws. "It's away from that ranch, so if we spill the kerosene it won't be smelled." "Yeah?" remarked another. Then they reached the eastern end of the plateau and turned to the right on a deer trail leading into the big jack pines. For half an hour, the route led around crags, into yawning gulches, and downward over the side of steep hills. It was almost dark when the leading horseman held up a warning hand. "Watch out!" he called. "Here's the ledge. Go one at a time." Billy knew this route well, but a rider near him explained the country. They approached the edge of the deep, yawning snowshoe canyon which ran from this point out through the steep foothills to the Circle J range. Down into the canyon led a narrow ledge up which stolen cattle had been brought in the past and over which it was planned to bring them again. It was a narrow trail, as dangerous as any known as the horses descended, one by one, far apart. So as not to frighten each other and cause a slip, the darkness became thicker. Sometimes the animals halted instinctively and stared below to make out their next step. Billy's heart was in his mouth, but he gave his animal its head, for he knew the horse could do much better by itself. It did not take long, but it seemed an age to him before he reached the bottom. There on the canyon floor, Billy found two of the outlaws waiting, and they remained longer for the last rider to come up. "It ain't far now," said one of the outlaws. "I'll give the signal." He whistled shrilly 3 times, and from down the deep gorge in the hidden shadows came an answer of 2 short blasts. Billy made note of that signal which had not been told him before. He knew that the men whom Devil had spoken about in Whisky Neck were waiting for him and the others. In a short distance these strangers appeared suddenly in the darkness, and a halt was declared. Billy could not make out their faces, but he felt he did not know them, and that they had not been in Whisky Neck. There were 3 of them, and they evidently were Devil's spies. It was they who had brought the kerosene from some town on the plains, planting it in the canyon for Devil's use. "Howdy, Jake," spoke up one to Billy's traveling companions. "We got word from Devil that you was coming. Everything is ready." The riders swung down from their mounts. Hands were shaking all around, and Billy was introduced. "Yeah, but he don't talk about it," replied a Whisky Neck gangster. "This and that champion gunslinger, eh?" asked one of the strangers, chuckling. "We heard about him. He scratched up Dobie. Gee whiz, that was some shooting." The stranger took the hint, and nothing more was said about Billy's reputation. He silently took a seat on a rock while the outlaws talked among themselves. The conversation had to do with the plans for moving the kerosene to the pine clump behind the Circle J spread. Devil had gone over it all before, but these strangers knew nothing about it and had to be informed. "We got 6 cans in a small cave here," one of them said. "Them cans is sealed tight and all wrapped up in gunny sacks. We can each carry a can on a horse that makes 1 man extra," he pointed out, for there were now 7 altogether. "Our friend," spoke up a Whisky Neck cutthroat, jerking his finger at Billy on the rock, Don't need to carry no can. Devil wants him to scout round in the dark and get a layout on the spread while we is making the kerosene cans ready. Then he can come back and join us, and we'll all trail down to Big Butte or wait for Devil to come up with the others." "That's okay with me," was the answer of a strange outlaw. "Let's hit moving," suggested a second one. "The kerosene is in the cave," said a third. "We got to be dang careful," instructed the last rider. "We ought to take off our spurs so as they won't jingle. Better tie bandanas around the bridle bits, too. Nothing is going wrong this time. You bet not." Chapter 7. A shadow in the night. After the kerosene was loaded, the 7 horsemen started out with one of the strange outlaws who had been waiting in the canyon taking the lead. He seemed to know the way to the Circle J ranch house. Billy West knew it too, but he played the part of ignorance. One of the gangsters who had come with him from Whisky Neck explained the course as they went along. He told how Snowshoe Canyon led down through the foothills to the Antelope Creek pasture of the ranch, and he explained that a detour would be made of that region because a big herd of cattle with a night guard was posted in that section. "Then we has a free ride right up to the pines behind the ranch house," he went on to say. "There ain't nobody ter see us, but we'll keep traveling through draws so as not to be outlined against the sky. You see, we ain't got no moon ter night." It was pitch black, and the mounts had to feel their way out of the deep defile. Travel was much slower, encircling about the Antelope Creek pasture through some brush. All except Billy were carrying 5-gallon cans of kerosene on their saddle pommels. They halted ever so often to listen when they struck the plains. The horses were urged to slow lopes for a few miles. Trotting was impossible with the inflammable burdens. Billy himself knew that they would not be stopped, for the outlaws were moving in a section of his range where no cattle was kept in the summer because of lack of water and grass. It was spring range. He wondered how these gangsters knew all these facts, and decided that they had been spying for weeks upon his outfit. What if one of these spies had discovered that Billy had not been home for a week? The Circle J owner caught his breath. There was a chance that one of them knew this Billy usually rode out to superintend his herds. Surely Devil Tripp would not strike at him unless he were sure to be at home. Could Devil have recognized him finally in Whisky Neck, and was the outlaw merely playing with him? Billy did not know. He only could hope that he had fooled these men. His task was becoming more and more dangerous, but he meant to stick to it. When he was given freedom while his present companions were placing the kerosene, he must inform his pards of what was up. Then he'd have to return to ride to Big Butte to meet Devil Tripp. Billy knew where Big Butte was, about 2 miles north, where a great solitary mound of earth reared from the flat country into the sky. How many men would Devil have waiting there for the final raid? Would it be so many that the Circle J punchers could not hold them off? "Take off your hat, kid," spoke up a dark rider beside the Circle J owner. "We is getting close to the pines. On a hot night like this, we is liable to have a flash of heat lightning, and that would show us up. Don't forget about taking off your spurs." "I get the idea," Billy drawled. The 7 horses trailed into an arroyo which twisted and turned up to the clump of pines. In the blackness, Billy just made out the figure of the gang boss holding up his hand. Not a word was said. The riders lowered their oil cans to the ground and dismounted. They toted their burdens to the end of the dry wash. "Single file," whispered one outlaw whom Billy did not recognize. "We plant the stuff just on the side-o, the trees nearest the ranch house. Unwrap it thar and unscrew the top so as everything will be set." He pointed to Billy. "You sneak off through the ranch yard and come back right away. You will meet us just as we're finished with the kerosene." Billy grunted that he understood as he removed his spurs. He set off following the first 2 outlaws from the arroyo, climbing up a low sandy cliff. Now the gangsters were having hard work lugging the full cans, and they swore under their breaths. Into the trees they passed, the leaders vanishing ahead. "Now," Billy whispered to himself, as mysteriously and as quickly as a trained Indian brave on a scouting trip, he stole off, leaving the men behind him in darkness. First, he slipped behind a tree, and bending double ran off to the side. Then he turned and ran faster on his toes. He knew that the gangsters were not expecting him to leave so soon, but he doubted if they would detect his absence. They were too busy with their own work to pay any more attention to him, knowing almost every tree in his clump which provided firewood for his home. Billy made no mistakes in the dark. But a few minutes he had reached the farther side slightly to the south. He was nearer the corral than the ranch house, and now he dashed in the direction of the former. He knew that none of the outlaws would see his shadow across the open space, for they had not yet arrived behind the ranch house. In the next second, Billy dodged around the end post of the corral and kept on running. The mess shack was not far beyond, and it was there that he headed. He would not have time to enter the ranch house and arouse the heavy sleeping foreman, Jim Benson. It was out of the question to go to the bunkhouse where his pards, Buck Foster and Joe Scott, would make a disturbance at a sudden awakening. There was only one other person on the ranch who was available, and who could be trusted to understand the situation quickly. That man was the slant-eyed, yellow-faced Chinese cook, Sing Lo, who bunked in the mess shack. This little fellow, as sharp as a fox, could be counted on in such an emergency. He slept usually with one eye open, as he would be sleeping this night with an uncanny oriental instinct that something was about to happen. He could be trusted to make no outcry, nor would it be necessary to explain everything over twice to a sleepy-eyed human. When Billy reached the rear of the mess shack, he trailed down the side to its middle. He found what he was looking for, a window of the main dining hall, open to allow ventilation. He went through it headfirst and fell inside the building in a heap. Quickly he picked himself up and started across toward the door of the cook's room. The position of the tables and the benches he knew and carefully avoided bumping into them. He didn't think that he had been heard and was sure the Chinaman was asleep. To his great surprise, a gust of air struck in, and instantly he knew what it meant. A door had been silently opened from somewhere. "Sing Lo," Billy whispered in the darkness. "It's me, Billy." Missly Billy came back an answer in the queer pidgin English of the Chinaman. "So be, shush shush," the Circle J owner instructed. "Shh, shh," replied the Chinaman. The little slant-eyed fellow was beside him before he even saw him. He was attired in a black Chinese nightgown, a gun in hand. He evidently had been awakened by Billy's body jarring the floor, and thought it a night prowler. "Listen, Sing Lo," the young puncher said hastily. "Devil Tripp's gang is surrounding the ranch just an hour before dawn. They've got kerosene planted on this side of the pine clump behind the house, and they'll throw it on the buildings to make it burn. Get all the hands up and everybody away from the ranch house and mess shack. Lay out to command those crooks' positions. Send to town for Sheriff Hawks, make it fast. Destroy that kerosene. Some way I've got to go when I shoot off my gun in the ranch house an hour before dawn. It's the signal for the raid." "Do you understand everything?" "Sing Lo savvy, plenty much," replied the Chinaman. "He fixie, so be." Billy turned before the last words were in his ears and ran on tiptoe to the open window. The next second he dropped through to the ground outside and went stalking down the side of the mess shack to the front. "You'll do it," he said under his breath. "I can count on Sing Lo." Now he raced across the ranch yard, turned into the barn, and was facing the ranch house. He was trembling with excitement, praying that his course had not been followed. He dashed across to the front of his home and sneaked past its veranda to the corner. The next moment Billy had passed to the rear of the ranch house, halted, and listened. There was no noise other than the trill of a lonely cricket. He could just see the dark clump of pines, and there was no telling if the outlaws were still there. Bent Double Billy raced for the trees on tiptoe. He went silently and swiftly, but someone heard him coming. A shadow stepped from behind the first tree, and a hushed voice snarled in the night. "Stick 'em up," was the command. Billy came to an abrupt halt. "What's the idea?" He called softly, "Don't you know who I am?" "It's the kid," said another voice. "Let him by." The next moment the Circle J owner entered the tree clump, and outlaws stepped around him. "We wondered what in tarnation happened to you," said a gruff one. "How did you give us the slip?" "You were supposed to go from here," said another. "Did you circle the trees?" "Devil wanted you to go right from here," a third snapped. "He's dang particular the way. And I am danged particular about the way hombres talk to me and the way I do my own business, Billy shot back at them, pretending to be angry. The outlaws were taken aback. Suddenly they began to fear, and no more was said. The leader turned off through the trees, mumbling an oath under his breath. The others followed, Billy taking up the rear. He noticed where the cans of kerosene had been opened, and already there was a slight odor in the breeze which was not blowing toward the ranch house. When the gangsters slid down into the arroyo, the Circle J owner counted them. There were 5 besides himself. Where was the 6th? Had that fellow been left behind to guard the kerosene? Would he sound an alarm if he saw Singlo skulking about? Or had that 6th outlaw followed him to the mess shack while Billy talked with the Chinaman? The Circle J owner was truly alarmed, but he did not know what to do. Suddenly, he realized that all his plans might go wrong. If Devil were notified that Billy's partners had learned of the raid and attempted to leave the bunk shack, he would suspect him, the young rancher. Then all would be up. What chance would Billy have against all those outlaws? We can take our time going north to Big Butte, whispered one of the outlaws. Devil won't be there until almost 3, and it ain't near that time yet. They started out, and there was nothing for Billy to do but follow. His heart was thumping wildly. He noticed that more than ever the gangsters kept away from him. No one talked, and he wondered if they suspected him. Again he counted the horsemen to make sure that there were only 5, and again he found one missing. Where was that man? When had the fellow left the others? Billy had heard of no plan for a man to leave them. Chapter 8. Striking the blow during the long ride north, which the outlaws took at a walk. The 6th gangster failed to turn up. The agony of uncertainty was almost unbearable for Billy. 100 times he told himself to turn back, that he was walking into a trap, that this missing raider had seen him enter the mess shack. 101 times he gritted his teeth and resolved to see the entire show through as he had planned. And sometimes he wanted to ask a companion rider about the missing outlaw, but he didn't. It was better that he appear unconcerned. But he wasn't when the darkness in Arroyo shut him out from the others. He loosed his guns in his holsters, leaned over and spoke meaningfully into his unbranded horse's ears. The animal twitched tensely, as if answering that it would be ready for anything. When the caravan drew close to the great black bulk of Big Butte, the riders halted. Again, 3 shrill whistles were signaled ahead, and 2 blasts returned from somewhere. The outlaws went on. A group of dark horsemen materialized from out of the darkness. "Jake," called a voice. "Yeah," replied one of Billy's companions. "I didn't reckon you all would get here so soon." There were almost 10 riders in the new group, which came up and milled about the Circle J owner, whose heart again pounded with fear. He realized that this raiding party was comprised of at least 16 deadly men. At his ranch, there were not a dozen altogether for defense. It promised a savage battle, but then there might not be a battle, provided Singlo was stopped from rousing the ranch. Had the missing outlaw waited outside the mess shack to knife the little cook? There was conversation, and Billy listened. "It took you a long time to come up from the ranch," snapped out a voice which Billy recognized as Devil Tripp's. Then he spied the lanky, hawk-featured fellow worming his horse through the group. "You are late." "It don't matter," said the chief rustler. "We just got time to ride back now for the finish." "Does you all know what to do?" "No, we ain't Devil," replied one of the riders. "You are early." One of the men who had been with Billy drew close to Devil's side, bent and whispered. The 2 rode off and conversed together for several minutes while the others waited. Billy could hear his enemy swearing. There seemed to be an argument over something, and the Circle J owner had a feeling that they were discussing him. This feeling was soon verified, for Devil called out for him by his newly adopted name, "Kid," and Billy went to him. "Jake tells me you didn't do things as I wanted," Devil fumed. "What was the idea?" "You mean because I snooped about the ranch a bit?" the Circle J owner replied. "That was what you wanted, wasn't it?" "You didn't do it the way I said to do it," Devil retorted angrily. "How do I know you weren't seen? If things go wrong down there tonight, it's going to be your fault." "Listen here, Devil," Billy replied hotly. "If you don't like the way I acted, say so, and we'll call quits right here." I ain't taking any bluff from no one. Remember it all the time. I agreed to go into that ranch house on a shooting expedition. I don't agree to nothing else. That's final. And if you don't, Billy was only bluffing the rustler chief, but Devil didn't know. Immediately, the outlaw feared that his prize gunman was going to back down on him, a very suspicious man at all times. He had merely wanted to question the young puncher. Now, he appeared convinced of Billy's innocence. Don't get sore," he interrupted. "I reckon it's all okay, but I am awful touchy on the way things go, you see. So many times something has happened at that outfit when I had the upper hand." "I wasn't trying, Terror." "All right then," Billy snapped, cutting his foe short. "But I ain't going through more cross-examinations." The other outlaws were gathering about them, listening to the argument. Out of the corner of his eye, Billy thought he spied Dopey by the white rags about his sore wrists. The little fellow now seemed able to hold his bridle reins, and there was a rifle under his leg and a saddle scabbard. Then he saw Bear Jevers near Dopey. Both were watching him intently. Billy knew what those looks meant. It seemed that they could hardly wait for an opportunity to pounce upon him. "We won't have no more talk about it," Devil was saying. "But kid, it's this way with me. I's been trying for 2 days to place your face, but I can't do it. I knows I seen you someplace afore. And it worries me. That's what gives me the creeps in a case like this. But we'll be friends again." The Circle J owner said nothing, but he felt that the crisis was past. He was relieved and decided that the missing outlaw had not spied upon him. Possibly the fellow had merely left the pine clump at the ranch before him and the others to ride to Big Butte to await Devil's gang. Then he soon found out that this deduction was wrong. "Did Pee-wee stay behind to put the kerosene on the barn and mess shacks and corral?" Devil asked of Jake. "Yeah," replied Jake. "Pee-wee is doing the trick now. He'll have all the buildings except the bunk and mess shacks soaked with the kerosene when we get there. There will be 2 cans for the bunk shack and the ranch house left at the edge o' the pine clump. We'll have to rush forward and throw the stuff on the buildings while the kid is inside the ranch house. Then we can touch a match when the kid shoots down Billy West." "Okay," said Devil. "Does everybody know what to do?" "Sure," the outlaws chorused. "Bear can handle the ranch house kerosene and Jake can wet the bunk shack," Devil ordered, telling his plans again so that no one would forget. "You rest touch matches to the other places, and then spread out into the dark places in a circle about the ranch yard. You shoot down everybody what comes out of them buildings, except, of course, the kid," he added, motioning to Billy. "He's running out the back door of the ranch house. Get the idea?" No one spoke now, and Billy had a feeling that there was not an outlaw in the group who didn't have some idea of what was planned for him, the lone wolf. And he decided that that plan was for Dopey and Bear to shoot him down as he made his exit. Wasn't Bear delegated to swish kerosene on the ranch house? Was it so that he would be near to kill Billy? "Let's move at a trot," said Devil. "I'll lead to the pine clump." The entire caravan jostled stirrups as they went. There was no conversation. Everyone was intent upon the plans for the raid, thinking them over as was Billy West. The suspense was something terrible, for now he knew for sure that the missing outlaw had been left at his ranch in order to distribute the kerosene. Had the fellow bunked into Singlo? Had the Chinaman been worsted in a fight, a slight fellow? The cook couldn't be expected to put up much of a battle with a bigger man. And if Singlo had been knocked on the head, it meant that the Circle J ranch house and the bunk shack were still inhabited. It meant that Devil Tripp's plans would succeed. How else could they not succeed? "They just can't," Billy swore to himself. "I trust Singlo." He wanted to turn on this entire gang, but that would be suicide and would gain him nothing. After killing him, they would continue on their evil mission, and now Billy must remain with them and foil their greater purpose, which was to wipe out his home and murder his pards. And even if the Chinaman had aroused the ranch and done away with the missing outlaw with the kerosene, there was still the problem of Devil Tripp's capture. How could that be brought about? This fiend must be caught, for if he wasn't, another raid would be attempted on Circle J in the future by him. Billy's head was in a whirl. He could not think there were too many angles to the situation, and before he knew it, the outlaws were nearing the pine clump. He strained to get the plan of the raid well in mind, in a last attempt to figure out what he should do himself. He remembered every word of Devil's scheme. The outlaws are going to sneak from the pine clump about the Circle J buildings, most of which already were supposed to have been wetted with kerosene, while Billy went on to the ranch house to be let inside by the owner, who happened to be himself. The other buildings would be wetted silently. Then, when he was supposed to shoot the real Billy West down, the outlaws would set fire to the ranch, trapping all the Circle J outfit. When those trap punchers ran from the burning buildings, they would be shot down. There was but the smallest possible chance that this kerosene had been tampered with by Singlo. There was but the smallest possible chance that the Chinaman had done what Billy had told him to. That was to get all the Circle J outfit out of the buildings and surrounding the ranch in such a manner as to command the very positions taken by the outlaws. In other words, for the punchers to trap the gangsters within the ranch yard. In that event, Billy knew there would be a terrible fight. There would be much shooting, but he was confident of the courage of his own outfit, and he knew these outlaws to be a yellow lot. They would run, Devil would run with them, for he was not fool enough to remain and fight. "I'll just have to nab him before he gets away," Billy said under his breath as the silent horseman trailed down into the arroyo leading up to the pine clump. "But I'll have first to go through with my part of this program which they expect of me. I'll have to go to the ranch house, and there I'll find out if Jim Benson is still asleep. If nobody's in the ranch house, I'll know that Singlo succeeded." The outlaw horses came to a halt at the end of the arroyo. Devil Tripp, standing in his stirrups, gave the sign to dismount. The riders swung down without noise. Guns were unholstered, and Billy saw some hombres take rifles from scabbards. Dopey was one of these. "Come on," Devil hissed at them. By twos and threes, the raiders climbed the sandbank and reached the pines. "Rebel, here is the kid?" asked Devil in a low tone. Billy edged forward, and his arch enemy motioned for him to follow closely. Then the band went into the tree clump on tiptoe. As so many black noiseless imps, they went through the pines and soon found themselves on the far end in full view of the dark ranch house. The gang halted where the kerosene cans had once been, but now there were only two left. With a shock, Billy realized that this was in strict accordance with Devil's plans. The Circle J owner had hoped all the cans of kerosene would be there, which would indicate that Singlo had done away with the missing outlaw. But that was not so, else how would the Chinaman know enough to leave 2 cans? He didn't know of Devil's plans, nor had Billy known them fully while in the mess shack 2 hours before. All hope faded, and the Circle J owner's hand sought his gun. He was ready to sacrifice himself by firing into the air and awakening his pards sleeping in the ranch house and bunk shack, and give them time to get outside before the buildings were fired. But something made him halt. "Devil, here is Pee-wee?" Devil asked. "He ain't here," replied someone. Shush, you fool," the rustler chief snapped. "Why ain't he here?" "Maybe he's now putting a last can of kerosene on the corral," suggested someone. "Sure," said another. "Can't you see he's left the last 2 higher for us?" Shh, Devil hissed. "We can't wait higher. It'll be done in a few minutes. Go out and find Pee-wee and send him to me." He pointed at Billy. "Get up to the ranch house." For a moment, Billy hesitated. He didn't want to leave the side of his enemy, but he knew he had to. Again, his hopes were surging up. Pee-wee's absence might mean that he had been captured. Pee-wee might not be wetting down the corral now as Devil suspected. Possibly. Singlo had accomplished his mission and done away with the missing outlaw. "Hurry up," Devil ordered, and the gangsters separated to find positions in the ranch yard. Billy noticed that Bear Jebbers took a can and Jake another as he stole out to the ranch house. He also noticed that Dopey remained behind with Devil, and then he was sure that the little gunman planned to hide in the tree clump and shoot him as he left the rear of the ranch house. Chapter 9, War, Bear Jebbers puffing over the weight of a can of oil. But soon the Circle J owner left this lummox at the rear of the main dwelling. For the second time that night, Billy West moved across his own ranch yard as if he were a sneak thief. As he went, he spied the outlaws skulking around the buildings. Behind him came turning a corner. Billy went down the side of his house, reaching the front. Still, there was no sign of his pards, but he knew there wouldn't be, even if they were prepared for the raid. He didn't see anything of the missing outlaw, Pee-wee, and that fact encouraged him. By the time he had reached the veranda, all the other outlaws in the ranch yard had hidden themselves. They didn't want to be seen if a window were opened in the ranch house in answer to Billy's knock now. He went boldly up the steps, for he was to play more or less in the open. Clumping across the planks of the veranda, he reached the door. "I'll soon know now," he said under his breath, and he banged his fist on the door. There was no sound. For a full minute he pounded again, and still there was silence. Again his fist struck the heavy wooden door, which suddenly moved inward as if pushed by a breath of wind. There was something uncanny about it, and Billy fell back a step. Light fell through the opening as if from a lantern, and from inside the dwelling the slow-going Circle J foreman's voice rang out. "Who is it? What do you want?" Billy was too shocked to reply at once, for he thought that all was lost. Jim Benson's presence in the ranch house meant that Singlo had not told him of the raid. "Let me in, Jim," he whispered. "It's Billy." Then he spoke loudly to fool anyone spying upon him from the corner of the veranda. "Is this the Circle J spread?" "I got some powerful important business with Billy West. We got to have his help." Then the Circle J owner got the surprise of his life. Jim Benson's hushed voice answered him. "Everything is set, Billy," it said. "Singlo told us. I'll play the game." Then Jim's voice changed. "What's wrong?" it demanded loudly. "I want to talk with Billy West personally," the Circle J owner replied. "It's powerful important." "Come in," Jim Benson replied, holding the door. Billy entered quickly, and the door was shut behind him. His big foreman stood next to him, a 6-gun in one hand and a lantern in the other. A glance around the room showed him that all the windows had been covered with blankets to shut out light going to the outside and allowing skulking outlaws to see what happened inside. Billy was so excited that he began talking right away. "What have you done, Jim?" he said. "Tell me quick, the whole ranch is surrounded. Devil Tripp's behind the house in the pines. Kerosene is ready to be lighted. We got to act quick, hurry." "No, it ain't," Husky Jim Benson snapped back. "Singlo told us everything. He knocked a hombre on the head what had put kerosene on every building but the bunk shack and ranch house. That skunk is tied up in the barn. We poured that newfangled fire extinguisher, what you bought a month ago, in the kerosene, and it won't burn. We filled the last 2 cans o' kerosene full of water. We figured them outlaws was saving 2 cans. The hombre what Singlo sneaked up and hit with a gun butt ain't got his senses back yet." "Singlo did that?" Billy exclaimed. "He's a genius. Devil's looking for that hombre Pee-wee now, so Singlo nailed him? Good. What else happened?" "We got all our Circle J punchers hiding in the buildings with shotguns and 2 6s each," the foreman continued quickly. "We also sent for help from the other ranches, and it ought to be here any second. Them reinforcements might be hidden down in the sinkhole behind the corral, ready to charge at the first sign of shooting. Everything is set. We're going to clean up that whole gang." "Jim," Billy cried, "this is more than I ever could have hoped for. But I ain't got a second to waste on congratulations." The Circle J owner was thinking like chain lightning. He knew that the outlaws were waiting for the sound of his revolver shots outside. Devil was waiting too. He was waiting for Pee-wee to turn up. He might become suspicious and flee. Billy knew he had to carry out his program before Devil discovered the trap. "That enemy must be captured above all the others. He was the one." "Jim, shoot your gun into the floor 3 times as I shoot mine," Billy cried. "Then stay in the ranch house." "Don't go out. I am beating it. I've got to get Devil. He's down in the pine clump, but he might get away on his cayuse quick." Billy's object in doing this was to make it appear that he had performed the task Devil Tripp had sent him to do. "Now," Billy ordered, firing into the planks. Jim Benson's weapon thundered with him. The explosions were deafening, shaking the entire building. It sounded as if a volcano had boiled up through the floor, and as the last bullet crashed into wood, the Circle J owner lifted up his voice in a terrible mock shriek of agony. Then he whirled as if gone mad and went racing across the room to a side window which looked to the north. It would have been faster to go through the house and out the rear door to reach the pine clump, but Billy knew that Dopey would be waiting for him with a rifle. In a jiffy he had ripped the blanket off the window, at which he halted, and he threw up the sash. The next second he jumped through the opening and tumbled sprawling upon the ground outside. Then he scrambled to his feet, still with a smoking weapon in hand, and turned about to see a foe. He was not a second too soon, for there loomed out of the darkness an enormous figure of a bearded man which he recognized as Bear Jevers. The hulking fellow had a revolver which he was swinging up to shoot him down, and his voice rang out in the night. Evidently he had been waiting for Billy and listening to what went on inside the ranch house. "So you killed that skunk Billy West, and now it's my turn to kill you," Bear said. "I thunk you might try and come out a window. Crash! Crash!" They fired at each other. There was but the slightest fraction of time between the roar of Billy's and Bear's guns, but the Circle J owner was first, and his bullet struck the big, hulking bully squarely in the pit of the stomach. Bear's slug grazed the side of Billy's head. Now it was Bear Jevers' turn to yell, as Billy had cried out in the ranch house, but the bully's scream was not a mock one. It was one of agony, which spelled death. He crashed his full length to the ground, dropping his gun. The Circle J owner heard shouts coming from the ranch yard on the other side of his house. Instantly, he knew their cause. The outlaws were shouting that the kerosene wouldn't light, and that they had been led into a trap. No doubt they were already fleeing for the pine trees. They had been instructed to set the oil ablaze at the first sound of shooting within the ranch house. That it had not lighted meant that any battle would have to be fought in darkness. The mysterious disappearance of Pee-wee had set their nerves on edge. "No time to lose," Billy cried to himself. "Devil will be on the run." He started as fast as he could go toward a shed on the northwest to give the rear of his own house a wide berth to fool Dopey. Billy didn't get far before the entire Circle J ranch behind him echoed with explosions that spelled war. And from on the other side of the yard, he heard a chorus of wild whoops that told him that aid for his outfit was riding fast from the sinkhole behind the corral. Jim Benson had said the punches might be hiding there waiting for the first sound of battle. The next moment, Billy skirted the shed and turned to the southwest to strike the tree clump on its side. Now he could see over his left shoulder past the rear of his ranch house and at the mess shack and into the corral. Flashes were breaking in all corners, telling of men shooting at one another, and shadows raced hither and thither. Some were headed for the tree clump, but there was no gun flame from that section. Dopey, too, had fled. Billy knew it for a fact. He reached the trees in advance of all the others and went speeding like a jackrabbit through the pines. At any moment he expected to run into either Dopey or Devil, but he didn't. They had a head start on him, and they must have reached the arroyo where the horses were hidden. As Billy came out of the wood onto the sandy bank of the arroyo, he saw that he was right. Below him were two men already in the saddle of the last horses left. All the other outlaw mounts had been stampeded with fright due to the shooting in the west. The bigger of this pair below was already applying spurs to his mount, and there was no chance to reach him. But the slighter fellow was just below Billy. With a leap, the Circle J owner left the small cliff and shot down through space. It was a long jump, but Billy made it. His fingers clutched at the shirt of the little fellow astride the mount, and the grip held. "Look out!" shrieked the rider. It was Dopey, you fool. He turned in the saddle to strike Billy with a loaded quirt. "Yes, skunk," he cried. With that, the horse jumped to one side, throwing Dopey from his balance so quickly that he missed his blow. The next instant, Billy had dragged him from the saddle and hurled him to the ground with such force that the little fellow's bones cracked. Dopey didn't yell again, although he would if he could have done so. His sudden silence seemed to tell that he had been knocked senseless and would lie there until discovered. Billy had no time to determine if the slight gunmen were unconscious. His mind now was on securing Dopey's riderless horse, which had shied off to the opposite sandbank of the arroyo which it was attempting to climb. With a leap, Billy was up to the animal. He caught the saddle pommel with both hands and jerked himself clear from the ground and aboard the cayuse. Then the horse went bucking down the arroyo in terror, but it was going in the right direction. Just ahead in the darkness was the fleeing figure of the bigger man on the second horse. Billy was positive that that rider was Devil Tripp. "Come on, hoss," he cried. "Stop your foolishness." The animal's bucking motion ceased, and in full terror it went speeding ahead. The dangling reins flew in the wind, and Billy leaned over and caught them. Chapter 10. Horse and Rider. Now it was a question of horseflesh and deciding whether Billy West would catch up with Devil Tripp or not. He was riding Dopey's mount, a wiry little cow pony built for carrying the much smaller gunman. As the cayuse raced out of their arroyo and over open plain, the Circle J owner could feel at once the strength of the animal under him. He knew that his weight might be too much for this animal, which was not a racehorse, but he was glad to have something to ride. This horse had been the only one available. Devil Tripp's mount was a white gelding, powerful and speedy. It was a much better cayuse than Billy's, and it had every chance to get away. The darkness of the night was lifting. During Billy's visit to the ranch behind, gray dawn had come in the east, appearing with amazing suddenness, as it does in Montana. So Billy could see the fugitive ahead speeding madly for the foothills in the west where safety lay. Once in the timber, Devil might shake off pursuit and take his time about further escape. "Come on, cayuse," Billy cried desperately. "We can't let him get away." But now he was riding as fast as his bronc could go. The breeze of early dawn was in his face. The pounding of his mount's hooves upon the earth was like a long roll of thunder. Already the horse was working into a lather, and it grunted and groaned with exertion. It would not have ever been able to maintain its present speed had not the Circle J owner ridden, as he never had done before. Billy was clamped in the saddle like a vice. He took the galloping motion of the cayuse. He offered no resistance by jolting about on his seat and rode for all he was worth. But it gained him nothing. Devil's horse was the better animal. As dawn lifted in a glorious sunrise behind him in the east, it revealed the notorious outlaw a good 200 yards in the lead and still speeding madly for the timbered foothills. Now Billy could see that Devil was turning in the saddle and looking behind, and the Circle J owner realized that the rustler had discovered that he was being pursued. But whether Devil knew his trailer to be one of his own gangsters or one of the Circle J punchers, Billy could not tell. Devil most likely was trying to recognize him, and soon the rustler attempted to determine who it was following him. The young rancher spied his foe raising a revolver on high. Crash! Devil fired. Calzone Graham! The bullet hummed by Billy's ear. The motion of Devil's horse made him miss the shot if he had wished to score. The Circle J owner did not turn to the side. He believed that Devil had merely fired at him to make him stop following, and now that Billy kept on, the trail was sufficient evidence that he was a foe and not a friend of Devil's. The notorious rustler must have made that deduction, for Billy saw him lash at his horse desperately to get more speed. The Circle J owner called for his mount to give its utmost. "We gotta catch him before he hits the timber," Billy cried. "Go it, Brock." All the danger which Billy had gone through in the last week would be to no end if Devil Tripp got away. For he knew the outlaw would someday return to plunder Circle J again. Devil's present gang would certainly be rounded up at the ranch, for the members had no horses to get away on. They were outnumbered and would surrender. The battle was won before it started at Circle J, but Devil would only get another gang sometime. His lieutenant, Bear Jebbers, was shot by Billy. Dopey was unconscious in the draw and would be captured. The events at the ranch had happened so swiftly that Billy could not believe them true. He was sure that both those men were done for. But Devil would only find other lieutenants. He simply had to be caught before he reached the timber. But he wasn't. Devil's horse was too fast an animal, and the several miles of terrible racing through draws, cuts, valleys, and slips on the plains, it gained on Billy's mount inch by inch. Daylight had dispelled all darkness when the timber was reached. Billy saw plainly Devil Tripp enter a narrow draw which ran westward up into the climbing foothills. The outlaw leader was almost 300 yards away when he vanished. "Maybe the timber will slow his cayuse," Billy shouted to himself. "Maybe the gelding will fall and break a leg. Devil hasn't got away yet." But in the draw, nothing like that did happen. When the Circle J owner entered the long passageway into the foothills, he spied Devil again. He chased him to the end, and then the outlaw vanished a second time into some brush and pines covering a rising slope. Billy could hear the outlaw's mount thrashing far ahead of him through the undergrowth. It was easy to keep to Devil's trail, for his horse left the sign of its passage through the brush. There were trampled bushes and broken branches. Suddenly Billy had a new hope. The thought of it made him cry out with relief, and he lashed his horse the faster. The possibility of Devil's capture was greater than ever before, the Circle J owner realized. Now it all depended on the direction in which Devil was fleeing. Billy's hope rested solely on that. Not far ahead of him, the Circle J owner knew was a deep, yawning gorge, known as Twisted Canyon. There was no possible descent to it, for the cliffs were as perpendicular as pine trunks. This deep defile ran from the northeast to the southwest. Devil was fleeing toward the northwest, and threatened to run square into the canyon unless he saw it in time to change his course. In his excitement, the outlaw evidently had forgotten of the existence of the canyon. If he were driven to its edge, he would be unable to turn back and would have to ride along the rim. This would cut down the speed of his horse, for the parapet of the canyon was as ragged and jagged as any badland. And Billy would be able to gain on his foe. "We've got him!" shouted the Circle J owner. "Don't lose him now, Cayuse. Don't lose him now, Cayuse." It was almost impossible to lose Devil Tripp, whose horse left a trail in the brush. When Billy had climbed over the hill, he came upon a small grassy plateau. Then he spied Devil at the farther end, where a section of big boulders and dry brush covered a tumbled terrain which looked as if it had been torn by exploding high-powered shells. The next second, Devil, looking back over his shoulder at Billy, vanished again as his mount floundered into the rough thickets. "He's right up to the edge of Twisted Canyon," Billy cried. "He doesn't know about it." The Circle J owner realized the sign of an approaching canyon from the change in the earth formations. But this evidently had escaped Devil's eyes altogether. The Rustler chief was too eager to lose his pursuer. He was riding into a dangerous section of land, looking to the rear and not watching ahead. If not careful, he might come suddenly upon the rim of Twisted Canyon and his horse drop over the cliff before it could stop. Before Billy reached the end of the plateau, it suddenly sounded as if this happened. He was riding for all he was worth when a terrible shriek sounded just ahead of him. It was an inhuman scream, the agony of an animal, undoubtedly a horse. The terrible noise broke out again and again each time, not as loud as before. It sounded as if the animal were falling down into some space with great rapidity, and his cry growing more distant. And between the intervals of the horse's high-pitched squeals, there echoed the lesser shriek of a human being. It was a cry of horror, that of a man approaching death. It sounded again and again in Billy's ears as his horse rushed into the brush at the end of the plateau. And then his ears caught the sound of a heavy impact, as though a large body had landed from a great height. "They went over the rim," Billy shouted in horror. "They didn't see the canyon. Look out, Cayuse." With all the strength in his arms, the Circle J owner pulled on his bridle reins. In a distance of 15 feet, he brought his Cayuse to a skidding halt in the dry thicket. The country was so tumbled ahead of him that he could not see whether a canyon yawned 20 feet ahead of him or not. Into the thick brush covering that land, a narrow path had been cut by Devil's Cayuse. Billy swung down from his saddle and headed in the direction of Devil's trail. The Circle J owner was on the run, and he drew a gun as he went. He didn't trust the notorious outlaw who was capable of almost any trick. There was a chance that Devil was hiding just ahead, although Billy doubted it. He was certain that it had been impossible for Devil to jump off his mount before it went over the rim of the canyon. Then the diminishing strength of Devil's screams told that he had whirled down into space. There was no sign of him along the trail left by his mount. Billy passed safely along it, and he came quite suddenly to the edge of the canyon. He came upon it so suddenly that he almost fell over the rim, which he was expecting to find. The edge appeared in the center of a dry thicket. It was hidden as treacherously as a bear trap. "They did go over," the Circle J owner murmured, falling to his knees. "Here is the sign of the horse's hoofs. They tried to stop, but it couldn't." The young puncher put his hands into the prints left by the galloping gelding. He felt over the rim of the canyon which had been torn, and then the Circle J owner looked over the edge. His eyes traveled down a steep cliff of rough rock and crags 200 feet of yawning depth below. He could see in the shadows about the canyon floor the white, flattened dead body of Devil Tripp's gelding. There it had landed with the terrible impact which Billy had heard. There was no doubt about it. Billy could see the shining white of its coat, and about it over the stones were crimson splashes. And near this animal was the smaller huddle of something black which resembled the body of a man. This was more or less near the foot of the cliff, and it could not be distinguished as well as the horse. But Billy was positive that he detected the arms of a man spread out from a body, and near this dark heap he saw plainly a hat. It was the gray Stetson which Devil Tripp wore. What a terrible death, Billy shuddered, drawing back from the rim. It gives me the creeps. The Circle J owner sat there a while, looking blankly up at the early morning sky. His thoughts were on the wicked past of his enemy. The devil had such a death coming to him, Billy said. It was the fate of a crook. It was a greater justice than hanging. Then slowly the Circle J owner got to his feet. He couldn't bring himself to look over the rim of the canyon again, and he turned and started trudging back to his own horse. Gee, he ejaculated. The boys at home are going to be glad to hear that devil's done for. Thank you so much for hanging out today. My name is Saul, and this is the Pulp Archive. Now, if you had fun, I'd appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, comment, and share. That stuff really helps. And like most stories we cover here, today's was recommended by you. So if there's a story you'd like to see, send us an email at pulparchivelibrary@gmail.com. We'd love to cover it. If you'd like to support the podcast and keep us going, consider becoming a member on Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/pulparchive. For a few bucks a month, you'll get access to all our podcasts, narration of complete issues, and private explicit episodes that wouldn't be allowed publicly. We feature almost every genre of pulp, fiction, horror, detective, western, and even sports. Special thanks to our patrons who make the podcast possible and make every episode of the Pulp Archive happen. Every episode is dedicated to our Patreon members. I truly could not do this without you.